singing up there. I'll be singing up there. Come on up to bright glory. I'll be singing up there.
Dr. Kim Harris, for this, the first webinar of our series, The World Sings. And this one is entitled Music Moving Movements. Dr. Harris, in addition to teaching courses on Black liberation and womanist theologies, leads music in a variety of liturgical and academic settings. She is a liturgist, composer, and recording artist, presenting lectures on the music of the Black Catholic experience, the spirituals of the Underground Railroad, and the freedom song of modern civil rights movement. Dr. Harris is a member of the Black Catholic Theological Symposium and the North American Academy of Liturgy, and is an academic member of the African American Catholic Center for Evangelization in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, as well as a liturgical consultant for the Archdiocese of New York, the New York Office of Black Ministry. Gifted cantor. If you attended the evening event from the 2020 Hymn Society Conference, you know that she is a gifted cantor and leader of song and a passionate cultural advocate who earned her PhD in worship and arts from Union Theological Seminary in New York City. So folks, welcome Dr. Kim Harris, and I've been looking forward to this. I know you have as well. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon and good morning to everyone. I'm in Los Angeles, so it's definitely good morning for me here, but so glad that you are here with me. So please take a stretch. I always have my students do this, of course, and then, loosen up your neck, in case you're having Zoom neck, as happens from time to time, and your shoulders. And here we go. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Sing with me. Leaning on Jesus, leaning on Jesus, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on Jesus, leaning on Jesus, leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning on Jesus, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on Jesus, leaning on Jesus, leaning on the everlasting arms. You might be thinking, if this is music moves movements, why would that be the first song? Well, because leaning on the everlasting arms was one of the first, if not the very first song that was used in that first meeting in Dexter Avenue Church in Montgomery, Alabama, in December 1955. After Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the Cleveland Avenue bus. After that young preacher, they had it at his church, that first mass meeting. And of course, that young preacher was Reverend, soon to be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You know, you learn something new every day. And I heard that he had just, you know, he went to Dexter Avenue. He thought he would be in a nice, quiet, peaceful setting there. He finished up his dissertation. He turned it in. And the next thing that happened, well, it was time for the Montgomery bus boycott. And so when everyone gathered in the church, you might wonder, what did they sing? Because of course they were going to sing. And the very first song was Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. Now they were going to take a vote about whether or not there would be a bus boycott. And you know, the songs that we know so well from the modern civil rights movement, some of them hadn't been, you know, developed yet or put together yet, but there is a very, very simple proposition when you're thinking about what you can use for music moving a movement. And just so you know, at the end of our time together, I will have a document and I'll send it to the Hymn Society and they'll send it out to everyone who is registered for this. Now, that very simple idea is use what you have, use what you know, and use what works. Use what you have, use what you know, and use what works. So they say leaning on the everlasting arms. And, you know, from what you know about the modern civil rights movement and things that happened during that Montgomery bus boycott, including King Jr.'s house being bombed, including people being arrested, including people losing their jobs. You know, that third verse really stand out. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. So people sang a song that would help them to feel shored up, help them to feel like they were protected in some kind of way as they were taking on something very dangerous, very dangerous. And that bus boycott with people walking and singing, refusing to ride the bus, walking a long way to work, wound up lasting for 382 days, over a year. And of course, if you've been watching the news of late, there was someone who indeed, before Rosa Parks, had refused to give up her seat on the bus. And that woman's name is Claudette Colvin. And I say is because Claudette Colvin is still alive. And actually right now she is working to have that ruling against her overturned. But that's another story. We're thinking about the songs. We're thinking about what moves movements. And music certainly does. Now, I know some people here, some of my old friends, yes, my Hymn Society buddies, and you may have been a part of the workshop that I led, and we were just talking about this. It was 2 years ago. Can you believe it? Mm-hmm. And I was there in Philadelphia with my mother, and you know, we all got together on Zoom, and we started off singing some of the music that had been a part of the American experience for a very long time and became part of not only the movement, the civil rights movement that was the Underground Railroad, but also the civil rights movement that was the modern civil rights movement. And sometimes people are still using those songs. Now, when we think about what people were singing, we can go back to the time of Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass writes in the narrative of his life, he says, there are people that wonder about slaves and singing. They might say, slaves sing most, and this is a quote from him, direct quote, the songs of the slave represent the sorrows of his heart, and he is relieved by them, only as an aching heart is relieved by his tears. But even as he said that, he also knew some of the other things that were going on. Because it wasn't only, as some of the enslavers said, a singing slave is a happy slave. He writes in his third narrative, I believe it is, My Bondage and My Freedom, he says, as he's writing about a song called O Canaan, I am more inclined to think that he, the master, suspected us. Because prudent as we were, as I now look back, I can see that we did many silly things, very well calculated to awaken suspicion. We were at times remarkably buoyant, singing hymns and making joyous exclamations, almost as triumphant in their tone as if we had reached the land of freedom and safety. And he goes on to say, a keen observer might have detected in our repeated singing of, O Canaan, sweet Canaan, I am bound for the land of Canaan. Oh, will you come and go with me? I'm bound for the land of Canaan. They may have suspected something more than a hope of reaching heaven. We meant to reach the north, and the north was our Canaan. The spirituals, those songs of faith and freedom, often carried double meanings, as did Canaan. And I remember, as many of you know, growing up in the Presbyterian church, and one of my favorite songs that I did not understand was this one. And we sang it once a month. And we sang, let us break bread together on our knees. Now, even though I can't hear you, I know you all are doing some amazing harmonies there in your Zoom rooms. Let us break bread together on our knees. When I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun, oh Lord, have mercy on me. Now, yes, it was born as a congregational song, most likely among Americans who were Episcopal. And the masters had them going to church. Maybe they were in the balcony, maybe they were in the back of the church, maybe they were even outside listening in through the windows. And they were singing that song and thinking about Holy Communion, but also thinking about something else. And it's that something else that I didn't quite understand as a person. Let us break bread together on our knees. There were times when that was used as a secret code to say, we are going to gather for a secret meeting. Everybody in the Zoom room probably goes to too many meetings, but you still need to know when and you need to know where. When I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun, oh Lord, have mercy on me. And yes, I can hear you in your Zoom room going, we know this. They were going to have that meeting away from the eyes and the ears of the master and overseer early in the morning, in a hush arbor or a brush arbor. They might turn a pot over on its side, thinking that it would help them not be overheard, or hang up some quotes. When I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun. They might be gathering for prayer, for the first prayer of the day in the Islamic tradition, yes, 15 to 20% of them were Muslims and continued to practice even as they lived under slavery. So they knew that the meeting was going to be an hour to an hour and a half before sunrise. On the eastern side of the farm or the village or plantation or the creek or the train tracks or the carpenter's workshop, to gather there early in the morning. I have to tell you, if you're doing some religious education and you're doing it through song, make sure that your students know in which direction the sun rises. Because start talking about the Underground Railroad and say the sun rises in the, and they'll say north. I know there are some people up north that think the sun rises there, but we know that it still rises in the east. Early in the morning, when I fall on my knees with my face to the rising, and oh Lord, have mercy on me. So yes, a congregational song, but a song that moved movements. Now, of course, one of the foundations of the liberating theologies, the God talk of the people, they expressed through their congregational song. And some of the congregations were the invisible churches that were the gatherings of enslaved and free African American, the invisible institution, where they continued to think about that incredible story. And they sang, when Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Thus spake the Lord, old Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll strike your firstborn dead. Let my people go. Oh, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Moses, tell old Pharaoh, that's who we're telling, yes, to let my people go. Yes, that story, the enslaved and free African Americans, they did indeed latch on to that story. They did appropriate that story and say, we are enslaved. And this story from the book of Exodus lets us know that God has an opinion, and that opinion is that people need to be free. Now, the idea of changing the words around a bit, now that was something that people brought with them from their African countries, their African context, their African singing, about putting words into a song that would take in what was happening in the moment. And one particular time that happened was December 31st, 1862. People had gathered in Washington, D.C., and they were gathering, waiting for January 1st, 1863, when Abraham Lincoln would issue the Emancipation Proclamation. And they say that an old woman, I'll say a seasoned woman, began to sing, go down, Abraham, way down in Dixieland, tell Jeff Davis to let my people go. Music, moving movements. Now, of course, the Emancipation Proclamation, it declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are henceforth and shall be free. Now, no, it didn't free the slaves everywhere, but it was a moral victory, and more of a victory than those who were enslaved had had up to that point. So thinking about the songs that we sing, that are songs of faith, they're songs of freedom, they're songs of encouragement, and songs of action. Now, as that bloody war moved on, as Black soldiers became a part of those who were in the fighting force, the white commanders of the Black soldiers noticed that there was a good deal of singing going on in the camp. And they even recorded that. Well, when I say recorded, took down the words as best as they could, and eventually even tried to notate a little bit of the meter and the rhythm. And one of the very first large collections of those spirituals is called Slave Songs of the United States. And I'll definitely send you one of my favorite links to that. And in the link that I'll send you, it's also a very good link to find the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. The collectors of the songs were Northern abolitionists, William Francis Allen, Lucy McKim Garrison, who was only a musician among this trio, and Charles Pickard Ware. And they wrote down, some of the songs as best they could of the African-American Civil War soldiers who were singing. And you'll find some very interesting songs in that gathering. You'll find Roll, Jordan, Roll. You'll find Rock of My Soul in the Bosom of Abraham. You'll find Michael row the boat ashore and Down in the River to Pray, studying about that good old way. Now, if you want to get ahead of what I'm going to send you, that favorite collection, it's called Documenting the American South. And like I said, it's got incredible resources in it, and it also has the full original digital copy, Slave Songs of the United States. And you can tell from those songs and how they continued to be used later on that they not only were songs of faith, but they had that, that idea of freedom as a part of what they were singing. Now, it's always interesting to me to think about our congregational songs that become parts of movements for freedom. And it's always interesting to think about that, because I think there was a time when I thought, well, if you take a song and you change the words, it just kind of goes on to that new life. But, I certainly know now it's not true. When people take a song and put new words to it, it continues to carry with it some of the meanings and messages of the original song, and then continues to accrue more and more meaning to it. So as people sang things like, Michael row the boat ashore, hallelujah. Michael row the boat ashore, hallelujah. Oh, sister, help to trim the sail, hallelujah. A sister, help to trim the sail, hallelujah. The river Jordan is deep and wide, hallelujah. my freedom on the other side. Hallelujah. The river Jordan is chilly and cold. Hallelujah. Chills the body, but not the soul. Hallelujah. Yes. This collection was published in 1867, and already some of those original words that were used by African Americans in the maritime trades, some of those original words had already been changed up a bit. You know, get my freedom on the other side. Now, you know, you weren't going to sing that if you were being overheard by the masters and overseers. But those Black sailors, they were called blackjacks. They would sing those songs and put all kinds of things in it, especially because they were also helping out on the Underground Railroad. If you have had a chance to see that movie called Harriet, and I love that movie, and they really emphasized the role of the blackjacks. And yes, they sang as they worked, because, you know, that's part of the sailing tradition, but they were also singing about freedom. So published in 1867, Slave Songs of the United States. And so the songs did gather meaning and more meaning. Now, as we come through the years, people had different feelings about the spirituals. The Fisk Jubilee singers, as they were raising money for their school, at first they weren't singing the spirituals. They were using classical music, European classical music, to say, yes, we are as good as anyone else, as smart as anyone else, as skilled as anyone else. And they didn't necessarily want to sing the slave songs. There were many African Americans who did not necessarily want to sing those songs of enslavement, because they were using the classical music to say that, you know, we deserve all that we have and more. We deserve not only freedom, but respect. And yet, eventually, they did begin to sing the slave songs. And they did them incredibly. They did them with great arrangements. And it really helped to raise the stature of those songs and the eyes, the wider eyes of the nation. And I would suspect also the wider eyes of African Americans who were trying to forget so much about what had happened during slavery. And then we continue on into the early 1900s when the incredible HBCUs were being founded. Early 1900s, even before then, because Fisk was certainly earlier than that. And the incredible choirs that they had and to have. And they were singing these songs that had moved from folk songs and congregational songs into art songs, singing the spirituals. But, you know, if we're talking about music and movements, we have to then look at what was happening in the early 1900s as the labor movement was getting going, and people were using some of those songs that had been the congregational songs. And, you know, they were using those songs as a part of their fight for better wages, their fight for better working conditions. So they were songs of faith, but once again, songs of freedom in the labor movement. Now, to think about some of the ones that would be an example of that, well, one of them that came through the labor movement was, I'll Be All Right Someday. And I know you're already ahead of me on this. I'll Overcome. And then moved into We Shall Overcome. Now, one of my favorite resources, besides a good old hymnal, of course, I love, just love a good old hymnal. I definitely collect them. I've got a few stacked up over here. And This is called Sing for Freedom. Sing for Freedom, and it is compiled by Guy and Candy Carawan, and it is published by New South Books, and also you can find it. Sing Out also had a hand in this. And thinking about Sing for Freedom, let me go to page 204 here, and the song I'll Be All Right. Now you might say, well, what's some of the story about that? And they have here on page 204 in Sing for Freedom, the anthem of the civil rights movement, We Shall Overcome, was originally a gospel song, which came out of the Negro church, known variously as I'll Be All Right or I Will Overcome. Now, I would say, if I were writing that it was originally a spiritual that then moved into those historic Black churches, and they sang things like this. I'll be all right. I'll be all right. I'll be all right someday. If in my heart I do believe I'll be all right someday. Okay, so you notice when they were singing it, even in congregational song, they said, I'll be all right. Because in that historic and traditional African-American song, I meant we. I meant we. And then when it moved into I will overcome, once again, I meant we. And you can see in the work that Dr. Bernice has done, and she talks about the fact that when it moves to we shall overcome, then you can tell the presence into that congregational song that had come through African-American experience. But now you have people like Pete Seeger and Guy and Candy Carawan, and so the presence of white culture and influence into that song then meant that the I became we shall overcome. But it definitely started off as I. Now, here's a little bit more of the evolution of that song. It began to evolve into a freedom song as early as 1945 during a food and tobacco workers' strike in Charleston, South Carolina. So it really moved from that spiritual and church song into the labor movement. It was a very nasty strike through 5.5 months of rough and rainy and cold winter. It began with 500 to 600 people, mostly Negroes, picking every day. Now, this was, you can tell this was written a long while back by one of the original picket captains by the name of Lily Mae Marsh. So she said that it was 500 to 600 people on this strike, mostly Negroes, picketing every day from 7:30 in the morning until 6:30 at night. Lord have mercy. And eventually people got tired and morale became low. And many people went back to work as the winter turned so cold and rainy. To keep up morale, the remaining people would sing themselves away some days. We sang, I'll be all right. And then they would also sing, we'll win our rights. We'll win our rights. Yep. Or we'll win this fight, or the Lord will see us through. We will overcome. So, they were also sometimes singing we. We sang it with a clap and a shout until sometimes the cops would quiet us down. But eventually, the strike was won on the national level. And we were relieved to see in the spring of 1946 when it finally came, and we went back to work. Yes, Lily Mae Marsh. If you get this book, Sing for Freedom, the story of the civil rights movement through its songs, you'll find this information on page 204. Continue. The pigs from Charleston took the song to the Highlander Folk School, where it became the theme song that Zilphia Horton carried it all over the South and introduced it to many labor unions. So, kept on going through the labor movement, because at that time, some of the work of Highlander, a good portion of the work was to support the labor movement in the United States. And then Pete Seeger later took it north and sang it on college campuses. And in 1960, Guy brought it to the sit-in movement at the first SNCC conference in Raleigh, North Carolina. That's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that group of young people that so helped to enliven the civil rights movement. And they kept the Southern Christian Leadership Conference on those, and they sometimes challenged them too. And then they say, the variant, and they've got a couple of variants of the song, right, printed right here. The variant below comes from a participant in the Citizenship School in Wagoner, South Carolina. And then they also have an authentic version of the original gospel song. So this book is a great resource. And then the We Shall Overcome version from the singing of Mrs. Alice Wine. And Alice Wine, if you remember, is also the source for Keep Your Eyes on the Prize, and was originally printed in Ain't You Got a Right to the Tree of Life. So thinking about the way songs evolve and the way music comes and helps to energize movements. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I know that I do believe. Oh, we shall overcome someday. There are some incredible stories about the singing of this spiritual, then congregational, then labor movement and civil rights movement song. And one of them talks about a gathering at the Highlander Folk School. And they were doing something illegal just by having white people and Black people in a room together talking freedom and making plans for the civil rights movement. And that was illegal. And so they were sitting there one day, and I'm sorry, I don't have the date for you. I have to look that up again. And all of a sudden, the lights went out. And they realized that there were law enforcement who were outside of the building doing what they could to try to scare the people. Now, they didn't know what was going to happen inside. It could be that they'd all be killed. It could be that, the building would be burned down around them. Certainly, it could be that they would be arrested. It was a very, very scary time. And when the lights went out, one of the participants began to sing in that moment. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I know that I do believe. Oh, we are not afraid today. And they would sing black and white together. But as movements begin to evolve and people sing it years and years, these days we sing, all of us together, all of us together, all of us together now. Oh, deep in my heart, I know that I do believe. Oh, all of us together now. The power of those songs, not only moving people and moving movements out there in the world, but also the songs help to move the people who are a part of those movements facing so much fear. It also moves them inside. And that is a part of what they can also bring from congregational song, from being a song of faith and thinking about, the Lord will see us through, and someone is threatening to burn down the building and arrest you, you want to not be alone. You want the divine to be a part of your making. You still want to know that God has an opinion, and it is an opinion for freedom. Now, thinking about these songs, while we're talking about Seeger, good old Pete Seeger, I was definitely blessed to have known him toward the end of his life and sung with him on many stages. And he loved to sing This Little Light of Mine. Yes, indeed. And when we think about this song, once again, thinking about the work of Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan, if you have a chance, there's something great that you can watch. And it's, the clothes and everything let you know that it's a little bit dated now, but what it has to say is still very important. And it's called The Songs Are Free. The Songs Are Free. Mm-hmm. Yes, Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan from Albany, Georgia. Yes, indeed. And, she talks about, that song, This Little Light of Mine. Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. So just south of Albany. Mm-hmm. And, I know I don't exactly say Albany correctly because, I for a long time lived up near Albany, New York, but she talks about how the song, This Little Light of Mine, it helped people to think about themselves, not only as a part of a movement, but to think about the way that if they had been raised under oppressive circumstances where they were told to keep quiet, keep your head down, just do your work, and you don't deserve the kinds of rights that everyone else has. When you sing, This Little Light of Mine, I'm going to let it shine. That is a call to let who you are be out there, let who you are be out loud. And, that's a difficult call for people who are living under oppression, people who are living under fear. So that song has had and has a lot to say, not only in the African-American community, but in other communities as well. Now, what's great is that, once again, the song goes from a spiritual and a congregational song and then into the civil rights movement. And so, some of us know that beautiful version by Paul Robeson when he says, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And then others of us, grew up singing, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Now, there were some verses that were part of some of the original versions of that song, things that say like, on my God gave the gift of love. Tuesday, peace came from above. Wednesday told me to have more faith. Thursday gave me just a little grace. Friday told me to watch, pray. Saturday told me what to say. Sunday came to get divine, to let your little light shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Now, as it became part of the civil rights movement, Pete Seeger added a couple of verses to it that continuing to move it into being a marching song and thinking about the power that is in and with the people. But, I contend that, for those of us who grew up singing it in a congregational setting, it doesn't take all the divine out of it. It doesn't take all of that, God being on out of the song, but these verses, and you can find these verses. Hold on, I'll show you another one of my favorite resources. Rise Up Singing. Yes. And it's the group singing songbook. I know many of you know about this book, and this is published by Sing Out Publications. There's also a section of it called Rise Again. But in that first volume, you can find these verses for this little light of mine. Mm-hmm. Some say it's dark and we cannot see, but love lights the world for you and me. Some say turn around and just go hide, but we have the power to change the tide. Some call life a sad old story, but we see a world that's bound for glory. The real power is yours and mine, so let your little light shine. Here we go. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Ooh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Mm-hmm. Now you might be thinking, she's looking awful happy singing those songs, and she's singing by herself in a room. But let me tell you, part of what taking a song from the congregational and movement, even when you are singing it by yourself, you have those unseen guests, those unseen observers, and those unseen singers. Some would say, if you're based in a congregational setting, that, the unseen observer is, God is there. God is there with you, listening, hearing you. The angels are singing right with you. The ancestors are singing with you. Some might say that if you're alone in a jail cell and you have been arrested, say during the Freedom Rides, 1961, that, some of the unseen singers are going to be people that you sang those songs with as a part of the movement when you were marching and before you got arrested, and you might be by yourself, but as you sing the song, you gather your congregation around you, even if you are alone. Now, I've heard just some stories about this. I teach at Loyola Marymount University out here in LA, And one of our professors, and he was a professor when I started, now he's professor emeritus, Bob Singleton, Dr. Robert Singleton, and his wife, Helen Singleton. They were at UCLA in 1961. They heard about the Freedom Rides and they were recruited to be part of the Freedom Rides. They were already married at that time. And they went and became part of Freedom Rides. And when they were in jail, Helen says that she was in a jail by herself. She was scared. There were, roaches and bugs all around. She wasn't sure how she was going to make it through the night. And she said that she sang all night long, and that helped her to endure what she had to go through while she was in jail by herself. You hear other stories about people like the SNCC Freedom Singers, stories you hear from Matt Jones, Chuck Nevlet, and Matt and Marshall Jones. And they talk about singing. And sometimes they would sing and they'd say, turn that radio off in there. They didn't have a radio. They were singing these songs. They were gathering the community around them. There's a funny story about, I think I heard it also from Bernard Lafayette. Turn that radio off. And they kept on singing. And if you don't, and then they said, stop singing. They kept on singing. They said, if you don't stop singing, we're going to take your blankets away. And they kept on singing. They said, if you don't stop singing, we're going to take your mattresses away. And they kept on singing. And they said, if you don't stop singing, we're going to take your toothbrushes away. And they said, being in those close quarters for so long, when they said we're going to take your toothbrushes away, they stopped singing. So, it's incredible to think of who we gather around us, but that comes from the roots of these songs being a part of the congregational experience. Well, I'm just going to do two more for you because, I've got like 2 pages worth of songs. And so when I send you the resources, through the Hymn Society, I'll list some of the other ones and a little bit about them. Here we are this week that we're recording this. There is, that incredible, hopefully they'll get something done, climate gathering in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about songs moving movements, what could be sung as a part of the environmental movement? Now, once again, I'm going to refer you to Rise Up Singing, because you'll find the words for what I'm going to sing in this song. Now, once again, it's a song that comes from a congregational context, and it has moved into being sung in the context of protesting for renewable energy, protesting for being sure that we pay attention to climate change because it's basically just about too late. And this song, however, was composed, the words were added, in 1980 by a wonderful group of musicians and performers. The group is known as Bright Morning Star, Adam Oster, Claude Dorsey, Charlie King, and Marcia Taylor. And they took a very familiar congregational song and they added some new words. Solar power, inexpensive energy, solar power, inexpensive energy. Now, this is a congregational song. You know how you can tell? Because if you've got a group of people gathered for a protest, you start to sing this song and all of a sudden you hear folks singing harmonies that you never heard them sing harmonies before. So it definitely keeps that context, keeps that feel, and it gathers the ancestors around us that are hoping that we will save this earth to the best of our ability. It goes like this. See the sun, how bright it shines on the nations of the earth, all who share this thing called life, celebrate each day's rebirth. Solar power, inexpensive energy, solar power, inexpensive energy. Brother, when we've heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the windmills in reply echo this glad refrain, solar power, inexpensive energy, solar power, inexpensive energy. Sister River, can you hear how the valleys call you down? Bend your rushing waters near, make the joyful hills resound. Solar power, inexpensive energy, solar power, inexpensive energy. How we love complexity when the answer's rather plain. Join us, son, in jubilee and sing with us this loud refrain. I can hear you. Solar power, inexpensive energy. Yes, folks will really sing that song, let me tell you, because it retains that congregational feel. Absolutely. So I'd just like to play one more song for you, and I say play this for you because it is a real favorite of mine, and it comes from that 2020 Hymn Society presentation. During that time, we were all in our houses because of COVID, and we could not get together in Atlanta, and I sure did miss that. However, I got a wonderful message from Hymn Society and from Brian, and he said, if you want to put together a virtual choir, go ahead and do it. So put together a virtual choir with M. Roger Holland and with actually many Black Catholics from all around the country. And part of why we wanted to do this is also to say, we are here. Yes, Black Catholics exist, and we sing. Yes, we do. So we put together, we did two songs. The first one was There's a Balm in Gilead. And the second one that we did, and we're so thankful and grateful to the Hymn Society for supporting us in doing this. I'll Be Singing Up There. And it's a real favorite of mine, and I've continued to play it and to use it all through these years since that time. And thinking about this song, I'll Be Singing Up There. We didn't do this for. There are people who use this song and they'll say, if you miss me marching down here and you can't find me nowhere, come on up to bright glory and I'll be marching up there, so it retains that congregational feel, and it also is a real song of activism. So I'll play this for you, and then we'll go, Brian, if you can help me out after this, and we'll go and look at the Q&A, and I'll answer as many as I can. And thanks again so much for being here. And thank you for those of you who watch the recording later. All right, so sharing the screen, making sure that I optimize, all those things you have to do. Now, making it large. Okay, here we go.
I'll be singing up there. I'll be singing up there. Come on up to bright glory. I'll be singing up there. I'll be singing up there. I'll be singing up there. Come on up to bright glory. I'll be singing up there.
If you miss me singing down here and you can't find me nowhere, come on up to bright glory. You'll find me singing up there. Yeah.
I'll be singing up there.
I'll be singing.
I'll be singing up there.
Come on up.
To bright glory.
I'll be
Singing up there.
If you miss me praying down here and you can't find me nowhere, come on up to bright glory, 'cause I'll be praying up there.
I'll be praying up there.
I'll be
I'll be praying up there. Come on up to bright glory. I'll be praying up there.
If you miss me walking down here and you can't find me nowhere,
Just come on up to bright glory. I'll be walking up there.
I'll be walking up there. I'll be walking up there. Come on up to bright glory. I'll be walking up there.
If you miss me shouting down here and you can't find me nowhere, come on up to bright glory. You'll find me shouting up there.
I'll be shouting up there.
Shouting up there.
I'll be shouting up there. Just come on up to bright glory.
I'll be shouting up there. I'll be singing up there. I'll be singing up there.
Hey, there's room for you, for you, for you. You wanna come on up.
Come on up.
I'm walking in glory.
Come on, come on, come on up.
Come on up to bright glory, 'cause I'll be singing up there. Walking in glory.
Come on, come on, come on up.
Come on up to bright glory, 'cause I'll be singing up there.
All right. I tell you, I love that. I love it, love it, love it. So yes, please put your questions into the Q&A.
I've got one. One question came in. It was basically, can we share the handout with their pastor and music committee? And I went ahead and answered it. Yeah, please share it
Absolutely.
with your colleague, your church colleagues, and especially music committees or worship committees. These types of things are great things for those types of groups to work with.
Yes, and then what we'll do, Brian, when I send that in, make sure you get the Hymn Society information on that, and we can be recruiting some more members.
All right, right on. Yeah, definitely. I have a question to kick us off. And I think I don't know if you said this at the beginning of the presentation or when we were doing our sound check and just talking before everyone joined us. You mentioned that songs within the various movements of today, there seems to be more of a disconnect between the protest movements that are happening now and the song of the people. I wonder, and this is something that I've certainly noticed, and various colleagues of mine we've talked about. Well, why aren't people singing more at these gatherings? And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yes, a few different things come to mind for me. Some of it might be because they're not feeling that same connection, because one of the questions I have for everybody is there something that you sing in your congregation? And not even necessarily the whole song, even just a chorus of the song or a snippet of the song that could be used to energize and fuel and sustain a movement, so it might be a couple things. It might be, excuse me 1 second here. It might be that either the songs are not connecting in the same way to social justice. And it might be that the songs and the preaching isn't connecting in the same way to social justice. So there isn't that feel of let's take these songs out there. One of my favorite assignments that I get to give the students, and I gave this to them. I'm teaching a course on Black liberation and womanist theology called Cross and a Lynching Tree, based on the work of Dr. James Cone. And he has that great book, The Spirituals and the Blues. And so, so I say to the students, okay, you've read that book, hopefully. You've read that book. What would you say are modern spirituals? What are modern day spirituals? And I say to them now, it doesn't have to be from a worship or congregational or religious tradition. And usually what they come up with, one of the top ones they come up with, which is actually a favorite of mine, is some of them talk about Beyonce. And she has a song, Freedom. And, you might say, well, that doesn't come from a congregational tradition. But when you listen to the words, and even when you see with some of the ways that she has said it in different things like the BET Awards, and there's a part in it that says, I'm a wade in water, tell the tide don't move. Actually, she probably says, I'm wade through the water, tell the tide don't move. But it's an obvious reference to wade in water and to that, Exodus story, come from Jewish tradition and from African American tradition, that's so important. So people are still hearing those songs and getting the idea of that song. Another one that they'll say is definitely a modern day spiritual, the song Glory, where you got, John Legend and Common, singing that song. But when you look at the lyrics, because of course they have to send me the lyrics for everything, you find biblical references in them. So people are hungry to make that connection between the divine and their movements. They're hungry to know that God or the universe, or however they are terming it, is on their side and is encouraging them. And, sometimes people say, well, they're doing those things in spite of religious traditions, but I don't think so. I think that, the traditions are still coming through bit by bit, because even one of the snippets of a song that's used in Black Lives Matter movement, I'm going to be all right. And, from Kendrick Lamar, everybody, when they're little bits and pieces and that, we're talking about Lord this and Lord that, it is still in there. And so I think perhaps we can encourage some pieces of what we sing in our congregations to be used out there when we're marching for climate justice, when we're marching for voting rights, when we're marching, we got to sing. And it doesn't always have to be the old songs, even though I love the old songs. I love those. So.
Well, that's the other thing that struck me during your presentation, and I recently had a conversation with someone about this as well. The kind of the bifurcation of secular and sacred, like this is a sacred song and this is a secular song, and what the journey that you just described during your presentation was this seemingly inevitable intermingling of the two, where does the sacred end and the secular begin, and where does the secular end? And I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about that, because that's what I feel like you just described with people like John Legend and Beyonce, where it's secular, but wait a minute,
Wait a minute. Well, I think there was a Pew study that just came out. And I'll send you the link for that. I'm glad you're recording this, because I can go back and get everything I said. I'll send you the link for. I'll actually send you the link for. But, and it said that even now in our time that African Americans are, in general, have many religious underpinnings, so even if it's not something that is in quote unquote church, that we are more religious in some way than some of the other people within the nation. So I think that the bifurcation is not there. And even, from when we first came to these shores, there wasn't the bifurcation in that way. There was no such thing really as secular and being separate. And I didn't even have time for all the various things. But when you think about some, the Stono Rebellion, and I'll have to send you the correct date for that. But the Stono Rebellion had music that accompanied it and chanting that accompanied it. And there were many people who had been brought from the Kingdom of the Congo and Angola. And, as they were staging a rebellion, they chose a feast day of Mary. They chose freedom, and it's the same word translated as salvation, and they sang and drummed and danced as they marched. Now, it wasn't ultimately successful. They get to Florida where they could be free, but they brought their Catholic faith with them, because they've been Catholic since the 1500s. So there wasn't that same kind of bifurcation that we have now. And I think especially through music, we have a real chance to help to bring many communities back to the idea of the songs of our congregational singing can enliven us as we work for freedom and justice, especially because for many of us, working for justice, working for freedom, working for rights, working for equality comes out of our religious faith, and that's not the only place it comes out of, but it certainly comes out of that. And so we need to be proud of that, and to show the easiest and quickest ways to do that is through our singing.
I think the last thing that I'm curious about, or to hear you talk about under all this umbrella, is if the dreams of Dr. Kim Harris come true over the next few decades, what does our culture look like, both as a church and as a broader society? Or what does our culture, what does it sound like?
Part of what I think it sounds like is that we are singing each other's songs. Singing each other's songs. It is wonderful to get to know people through their music. And it's not that, I may not quite get the rhythms right. I may not quite get the clapping right. I may not, some of the notes, they may have a way, but there is something about being within a community and have it all around you as they're singing their songs. And it's something to try to sing our songs with each other. Because when we sing songs, especially that aren't from our tradition, we've got to bring a humility to it. I know people always ask about, appropriation. Appropriation, I believe, is to approach someone else's culture without humility. So if we can bring that humility and create relationships and stumble sometimes and try sometimes and get a little bit better sometimes, that would be one of my dreams, that we're singing each other's songs and we're singing them together as we are working for freedom.
Well, thank you so much for once again spending time here at the Hymn Society and bringing your wonderful spirit of storytelling and something about the way you can weave together music and storytelling and vision is just beautiful. And so I'm always blessed to get to learn from you. So thank you so much. And we will be archiving this for all the registrants who didn't get to sign on live today. Or if you watch this live, you can watch it again. We'll be sending out the link as soon as we have a chance to edit this up and get it up on our YouTube platform. And we'll be sending out the handout sometime later this week or early next week. So look for that email from the office. Dr. Harris, is there anything you want to leave us with before we all sign off?
Well, I think one thing that I know I didn't say that I meant to is that song, This Little Light of Mine, that was one of those early freedom movement songs too. When you hear some of the beginning groups of freedom in Montgomery, Alabama, that was one that they sang. And I know so many people sing that song. So many people sing that song. And I want to make sure that that freedom history comes along with the singing of that. And I especially want everybody in the Hymn Society, let your lights shine, because I think as musicians, as singers, as congregational leaders, we have got a lot of light to shine. So please keep on doing it.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.